If you were to sink below the water and swim amongst a coral reef, would you be able to identify which plants and animals do not belong? What about if you were to dive through a kelp forest? Or perhaps swim through seagrasses? Most of us will find that we are unable to tell.
Can you give an example of a marine invasive species found in Australia or the world?
A type of algae.
Maybe a yappy?
Sharks?
I can't provide an example.
Whereas most of us can name at least one terrestrial native species in our immediate or broader areas, the everyday person knows very little about the invasive marine species that inhabit their waters. We are here to change that. But first, let's talk about what it means to be an invasive species in an underwater world. It is important to establish that no species itself is invasive. In other words, there is no one species that is invasive to every water in the world. The lionfish is native to the Indian Ocean, such as this one in Ningaloo Reef off the west coast of Australia, and therefore is no problem here. It is part of the food chain and therefore has enough predator and prey to sustain its population without suffocating the reef ecosystem. However, once the lionfish was introduced to the coast of North America, we had a problem, as this marine environment does not contain any species that can prey on these fish, keeping their population low. So, they're reproducing at high rates and eating away at the small prey that should be feeding the reef's native occupants, placing North America's marine areas in danger of losing a large portion of their natural biodiversity if the lionfish population cannot be controlled. But when did this become a problem? Well, it wasn't always a problem. In the past, the only ways otherwise stationary marine species could travel the oceans were by vessels such as driftwood. The likelihood that a species of clam, for example, would have attached itself firmly enough and then for the log to have travelled successfully to another place, during which the clam would have had to survive, before maybe landing in an area that it could find the food and shelter that it required to live, was slim. Even more slim was that another member of its species would have had to done the same so they could reproduce. So, the frequency of invasive species were incredibly low, barely an issue. Since the human invention of trade by ships, the frequency of invasive marine species has been increasing exponentially. We now live in a world of immense global trade, polluted oceans in which plastic floats with the currents, and increased extreme weather events due to climate change, creating millions of opportunities for species to cross borders and establish themselves in places which they have not adapted to belong. The largest source of invasive marine species is by cargo ships. 80% of world trade is carried by ships. When they are in port, they take in a large quantity of water called ballast water, which helps keep the ship stable when cargo is not being carried. Within this water are small species of marine fauna and flora, which will be released in another port somewhere else in the world before being loaded with cargo. 10 billion tons of ballast water is transported every year, which is equivalent to 4 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. This translates to 7,000 species transferred in ballast water every hour of every day, with one invasion every 9 weeks. The surface of ships that lie beneath the water are a great place for small organisms such as clams, mussels, and barnacles to stick onto and travel the world's oceans. Methods for preventing ballast water and hull transportation of invasive marine species in 2023 are moderately successful in their prevention, but people are always looking to improve this preventative technology.
At Fisheries, that we do have a biosecurity section which looks at the whole of WA waters and introduced and potentially threats that come in, whether that's through commercial fishing, whether that's through vessels that are coming in to our harbours from international waters. And the way we might look at this is looking at having settlement plates in the harbour that pick up any invasive species that may settle on that, whether that's growth or algae or bacteria or anything like that.
However, even with prevention, if a non-native species happens to survive and enter the waters of a new port, there are plenty of man-made structures such as jetties, underwater pipes, and docks to give these common invasive organisms such as species of clams, mussels, seagrass, and kelp great shelter and help them establish and become an invasive species in this new environment. At first glance, the issue of invasive marine species seems small compared to our other ocean challenges. But it is how the effects of invasive marine species exacerbate these bigger issues, such as climate change effects and food production for a growing global population, that makes it crucial to eradicate and prevent these marine pests. Let's dive deeper into the case of the lionfish to illustrate this. In the coral reef ecosystems of the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean, the lionfish's voracious appetite has led to a significant loss of biodiversity in these regions. Native species, once thriving, are now dwindling, unable to compete for resources. As the lionfish population grows, it outcompetes native larger species for food and shelter. Additionally, the absence of small fish, which usually control algae growth in corals, leads to rampant algae growth. This, in turn, weakens the health of the reefs, causing a chain reaction of ecological imbalance. But the lionfish invasion is not the only threat these coral reefs face. Climate change, with its rising ocean temperatures, poses a significant challenge. The world's coral reefs, vital hubs of marine biodiversity, are under siege. Coral bleaching, a consequence of rising sea temperatures, is pushing these remarkable organisms to their limits. Corals, as foundational species, provide food, shelter, and nursery grounds for countless other species within the reef ecosystem. In essence, the invasion of species like the lionfish, coupled with the effects of climate change, creates a devastating synergy. Biodiversity loss caused by invasive species weakens the ecosystem, making it more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Climate change, by causing coral bleaching and other environmental stresses, further accelerates biodiversity loss. It's a vicious cycle where each factor amplifies the other's destructive potential. The devastating consequences of invasive marine species reverberate far beyond the delicate coral ecosystems. The fishing industry, a cornerstone of coastal economies worldwide, is under threat.
Invasive species can have devastating impacts on both our commercial and recreational fisheries, as well as irreversible damage to our marine environment, and that can be seen all around the world.
These species deplete native fish populations, making it harder for fishermen to catch the fish they rely on for their livelihoods and our food security. The once thriving fish industry now faces dwindling fish catches and economic uncertainty, placing a major protein source for our global population in danger, especially as we head towards a future of 10 billion people. In order to secure a future food source from the sea and ensure ecosystems have a better chance of resisting climate change effects, we must find solutions to the invasive marine species epidemic.
Now we will look at innovative ways that we can make use of our current invasive species until they are eradicated, and a new nature-based solution that can help decrease the possibility of new invasive species. Looking at the lionfish once more, we showed buckets full of carcasses, the byproduct of the inevitable killing of these predators. Businesses in the areas affected by the lionfish, especially the local coastal communities of the Caribbean islands, have been using the colorful fins of the hunted lionfish to make jewelry and meat to serve at restaurants, to continue funding the effort to raise awareness and find a temporary fix to hunt these fish out of their waters. Sargassum is an example of invasive species that is becoming more and more concerning because its negative impacts are exacerbated by climate change. This seaweed is naturally found in the tropical part of the Atlantic Ocean, but is currently spreading abnormally due to the increase of sea surface temperature and maritime transport, as well as to changes in ocean currents. The excessive proliferation of sargassum has disastrous consequences. They destroy coastal areas, beaches, natural habitats, and prevent photosynthesis in the ocean. When transported, they capture chemicals and heavy metals. Once they reach the beach, they start to ferment, releasing malodorous and toxic gases. These phenomena are overall detrimental for tourism local economies. Driven by the aspiration of adding value to undesirable biomass, the French business Algopac addresses the challenge of transforming sargassum into bioplastic. This smart innovation can simultaneously constitute a sustainable and temporary solution against the proliferation of invasive sargassum and progressively slow down and replace the increasing production of polluting fossil fuel plastics. As of today, Algopac's products are 100% composed of sargassum, making their production almost carbon neutral and less energy and water consuming. For instance, Algopac produces bioplastic noodles, flower pots biodegradable in 10 weeks, and recyclable pencils and eco cups. This smart and ecological solution has nonetheless some limits. Not all the sargassums can be used. It depends on how clean they are. If the sargassums are collected in the high sea, they often contain too much arsenic and other heavy metals to be used by the food industry or for natural fertilizers. If the sargassums are collected on the beach, they must be processed, purified, and stabilized to be valued. That is to say, all the chemicals and heavy metals they carry must be removed, and the fermentation process of the sargassum must be stopped to prevent the release of toxic gases. The necessary infrastructures to pursue this process exist in Saint-Malo in Brittany, France, and bioplastic is produced there, but that is not the case in Guadeloupe yet. This solution is viable and has potential in the long term, but depends on the willingness of local authorities to invest in the required infrastructures to treat sargassums according to sanitary norms. Natural-based solutions should not be overlooked to solve the issue of invasive species. The program Living Seawalls of the Sydney Institute of Marine Science developed panels installed on coastline infrastructures mimicking the habitat features of natural shoreline ecosystems. They allow critical habitats for marine life to be added to marine constructions. Those panels have already been installed in Australia, in Fremantle and Sydney, in Singapore and Europe, where an increase of up to 36% in the number of fish, seaweeds, and invertebrates has been observed. The panels are an innovative means to reintroduce filter feeders, such as mussels and oysters, that have the property to clear the water by eating phytoplankton and algae. Where those panels, installed in coastline areas impacted by invasive species of algae, filter feeders could help eliminate the intruders. This natural-based solution can be implemented at a relatively low cost and requires very little infrastructure and engineering.
It is definitely an important area of research that requires ongoing monitoring and management and a long-term focus.